So consider this a supplemental episode of sorts for the Imperial Civil War history videos. You can also just watch this on its own. So this is kind of my attempt to see what are the major types of fighter craft, and I'll also do one for capital ships in Star Wars. What is their purpose? What is the kind of IRL comparison to it, etc. My idea is here to try to maybe, between this and the capital ship video, to explain a little better how space combat works in Star Wars. Because Star Wars has probably one of the better, and I guess you could say more realistic portrayals of space combat. Not so much in terms of what the ships can do, but their roles. Because keep in mind, Star Wars is very much based on World War II. So if you look at like a lot of Imperial stuff, for instance, it's extremely good at what it is. Like it's very powerful. The Imperial 2, or as I like to call it, the Imp Star Deuce, has a lot of guns and a lot of armor and very strong shields, but it has glaring weaknesses, and that's kind of inspired by German tanks of World War II, like the Tiger and Panther and stuff, which were very impressive, but had huge issues. Like with the Oliphant or Ferdinand, it didn't even have machine guns, I don't think. So infantry could literally just walk up and throw Molotov cocktails on it and stuff. So it is very much inspired by that. And fighter classes within the Star Wars universe are very reflective of reality as well. I'm not sure how much specific ships are inspired by specific ships. I know the K-Wing is pretty much an A-10 Thunderbolt and a what is it called again? Let me just look at my list here. A MG-100 Star Fortress is obviously a reference to the Flying Fortress or the Strato Fortress, the B series of U.S. bombers, or I guess you could say the Fortress series of bombers. But I'm not sure really if the rest have an exact equivalency. So let's just kind of go through the classes. Because, like I said, they're roughly equivalent to IRL. And as we see in Star Wars, like in real life, basically everything gets replaced. And today we only kind of have we only have some ground attack aircraft, but mainly we have heavy bombers and multi-role. Because as we'll see as we go through this, it's just easier to produce one or two different types of fighter rather than make a whole bunch of specialized types. It just makes logistics easier, it makes training easier, and that's kind of why we see them just use the X-Wing for everything. Because the X-Wing can do everything good. So a lot of time they're like, what's the point of building A-Wings or Y-Wings which do some things slightly better but can't be used in all circumstances? The X-Wing also has a hyperdrive, so they can operate independently of carriers. So more or less what wound up happening is the Alliance just kept upgrading their X-Wings. Even when they became the New Republic, they used them for decades afterwards. They would just periodically upgrade their shields engines or redesign it. They introduced successor craft like the E-Wing, but they never really took off just because there was really no need for them, etc. So the first class we're going to talk about is the Interceptor. So Interceptor is something that doesn't really exist in real life anymore because it's been entirely taken over by multi-role fighters. And with kind of the advent of heat-seeking missiles or radar-seeking, of guided missiles, I guess you could say, there's not really the same need for one because dogfighting doesn't really happen anymore. So to my mind, an Interceptor is something that's designed solely for fighting other starfighters. If it can attack a larger ship, like a capital ship or a corvette or a cruiser or whatever, great. But that's not its purpose, and most of them can't do that. So to my mind, the traits of an Interceptor are it's fast, it's maneuverable, and it doesn't have to have, and this is very important, missiles or torpedoes. Because laser cannons are just not very effective against capital ships. They can't really go through the armor, and the shields are too strong. In Star Wars, you have a couple different classes, and maybe I'll do a video on that. You have blasters, which are small. They're handheld. You have like heavy blasters, which are like the equivalent of machine guns. and then you have blasters that are on like ground attack craft and that sort of thing. So they're kind of like small arms. Lasers are kind of like light cannons, like I guess you could say like a 20 or 30 millimeter cannon, which is good in a variety of roles. It's very good against starfighters. It's good against ground targets, etc. But it's not very useful against capital ships. And then you have turbo lasers, which are very effective against capital ships and bombardment and stuff like that. But they fire too slow and they have bad tracking, so they aren't very good against starfighters. So interceptors normally will only have laser cannons and nothing else. So let's just look at a couple what I would consider to be interceptors. So probably the most famous ship I would consider to be an interceptor would be the TIE Fighter. Now, a lot of people would consider the TIE Fighter to be a multi-role because it's the Empire's kind of mass-produced standard starfighter, kind of like the X-Wing is for the Alliance. But I can't call it one because it doesn't have a missile launcher. And if you've read the Rogue Squadron books, missile or proton torpedo launchers allow starfighters to really punch above their weight. Like something Rogue Squadron would often do would be to jump in, launch all of their proton torpedoes and jump out, and that could destroy frigates. If they could catch a Star Destroyer with its shields down, they could cripple or blow it up. So the TIE Fighter is very maneuverable, it's very fast. Its weapons are nothing to write home about. It's got 2 rapid-fire laser cannons, which aren't bad for dogfighting, but it has no shields. It has really bad field of view because the wings block off the cockpit, and the cockpit's pretty small to begin with. So that's kind of one of the reasons why it just isn't very effective. Because it's basically a interceptor that's been pressed into a general-purpose starfighter role. And unlike something like the A-Wing that has missiles and has a shield, it doesn't have either of those things. So it's just not very good at what it does. What's a lot better, though, and you notice that as with most interceptors, they're very, I guess you could say, I don't know, small. They're very stripped down. And they basically just have wings, cannons, and a cockpit because they don't really have room for shield generators or, like I said, missile launchers. They're just designed to be as fast as possible. And there's nothing really wrong with that, but it's not very good as a multi-role. That being said, you can use, if you have to, you can use them for other stuff. In particular, atmospheric flight. Speeders aren't that widely used in Star Wars, like conventional. No one uses conventional, but like in atmosphere ships. I guess the V-Wing would be the only one I can think of. There's a couple others, but it's just easier to use a starfighter or some sort of multi-role. So the TIE Fighter, I'd imagine, isn't bad if you need to do like a strafing run or you need to provide close air support. But once again, it doesn't have shields. And its armor is crap, so I'm sure any kind of ground-based anti-air system could just cut it apart like butter. Now, the Empire intended to replace the TIE Fighter with the TIE Interceptor. Now, this is actually an actual interceptor, because instead of 2 laser cannons, this has 6. So it has 3 times the firepower of a TIE Fighter, so this can do some serious damage. Whether or not it has enough power to successfully strafe a capital ship, I'm not sure. But I'd much rather have 6 laser cannons against something like a Corvette or a frigate than 2. Also, it was a lot faster and more maneuverable. And the other good thing is having the increased amount of firepower means it's better against shielded rebel fighters. So the Interceptor was a huge improvement, but it still showed that the Empire was unwilling to develop a true multi-role fighter, which is kind of what's needed. So then some other kind of interceptors we have in the Star Wars universe, we have the A-Wing. Now the A-Wing is good for what it is. As with most interceptors, it's very sleek. It's very kind of stripped down. It has 2 rapid-fire laser cannons, much like the TIE Fighter, but it does have shields. Not good shields, but it has shields, so it can take a shot or 2. I mean, there's a huge difference between shielded and unshielded. There's a huge difference between bang, you're dead, and you can take 2 or 3 hits. And the AoE can take 2 or 3 hits. And I think in Star Wars, shields recharge when they're not being actively attacked. So, I mean, that's pretty useful. The A-Wing also has concussion missile launchers. So, I think they're heat-seeking too. And concussive missiles can do a lot of damage. See, one of the reasons why missiles are so widely used in real life is missiles are the same regardless of what they're attached to. So if, like, you can put the same missile on a ship, on a fighter, on a ground-based thing, and it doesn't really matter. The firepower of the missile is contained within the missile, so you don't have to worry about... Also, they're recoilless, and they don't require an internal power supply. So while things like turbo lasers are nice because you can basically fire them as long as you have gas, and gas lasts a very long amount of time when you're firing it, so they can fire thousands of shots or hundreds before needing to reload. You need a huge power generator. You need like a whole ship to do it. Whereas with a missile, you can just fire and forget it, and it provides a lot of firepower very rapidly. The Empire in general didn't like missiles because they were expensive and because they could only carry a limited amount of them. So a lot of Imperial capital ships either don't have missile launchers or have them stripped down. Let's see here. So the next thing we have is the V11 Torrent Starfighter, which was kind of the predecessor to the A-Wing. I don't know a ton about it, but as you can see, traditional interceptor design, very small, very maneuverable. This one actually does have missile launchers. They aren't particularly good. I think they only carry like 2 or 3 missiles, so I doubt it would be very good against the capital ship. But having missiles is always better than not having missiles. Kind of some other ones we have is the ET-2, which is what Anakin flies in Revenge of the Sith. Once again, as you can tell with all starfighters, all interceptors, very stripped down and very minimalistic design. You also have the Jedi Starfighter. Interceptors are really good for Jedi to pilot because the Force allows them to kind of overcome the weak shields. The First Order has their own version of it. I'm trying to remember what it's called, the TIE Space Superiority Fighter, which I would consider an interceptor because it doesn't have a missile launcher. So, yeah, new favor of the TIE line. Let's see, what was it called again? It was called I think it was the TIE FO. Yeah, the TIE FO. So, yeah, the TIE FO has laser cannons, but it doesn't have missile launchers. They did give it shielding, at least, which, I mean, is something. But, yeah, that's basically what an interceptor is. So, let's look at multi-role next. Or, actually, sorry, very quickly. So, some IRL examples. Like I said, they stopped largely using interceptors after World War II at the advent of guided missiles. But some kind of noticeable ones were the Hawker Hurricane and the Supermarine Spitfire. While there were versions of it that had anti-tank cannons or light bombs, by and large they were designed for one purpose and one purpose only, shooting down enemy bombers. And because they're fast and because they have a lot of guns, they can do that very well, but they don't have anything really heavier for ground attack or that sort of thing. That being said, like I said, you can use anything for anything. I mean, a Hawker Hurricane still has, 8 machine guns or something. So if you want to strafe an enemy infantry position, that's going to do a lot of damage. It's just not really optimized for that. Probably kind of the most recognizable one might be the Messerschmitt M163 Comet, which was a rocket-powered interceptor, which was used because, it has a rocket, so it would go up in the air really quickly. I think it had a 30-millimeter cannon or something like that. It would just shred enemy aircraft, and then it would come back down. And was it ME-202? 262? Whatever the jet-powered one was similar. It was mainly designed as an interceptor. So, multi-roller space superiority fighter. So I would define it as always having missiles, torpedoes, or some other heavy weapon. The vast majority have concussion missiles or proton torpedoes. Proton torpedoes are basically equivalent to World War II era torpedoes in terms of role and power. By the time of World War II, even kind of very dated planes like Gloucester Gladiators, which were biplanes, could sink battleships due to torpedoes, and we can see this in Star Wars too. Especially since Imperial Star Destroyers are very poorly designed in a lot of ways. They have a lot of design benefits, but they also have a lot of very deep flaws. So yeah, so multi-role can be used against both. They tend to have heavier weapons than an interceptor, lighter than a bomber, and they just tended to use them for everything. A lot of the multi-roles also would have hyperdrive. So hyperdrives are very useful because the Alliance really, contrary to what people think, didn't really use carriers. Most of their ships carried very few TIE fighters, which is partially why very few fighters, just because they were so small. And the thing is, they didn't really need to because their fighters were hyperdrive equipped. So Rogue Squadron, for instance, didn't have any carriers or capital ships. They would just jump in as a group, cause havoc, blow up the target, and then jump out and go back to base. So that was another use. Whereas a lot of interceptors, like the TIE Fighter, the droid TIE Fighter, etc., just didn't have hyperdrive. So they had to be with a carrier ship, like a Star Destroyer or something similar. But once again, they're designed to shoot down other fighters. So the fact that they don't have heavy weapons, I guess, is in part justified by the fact that the Star Destroyer is covered, like utterly covered with as many heavy guns as they can shove on it. So all it's designed to do is basically just to keep fighters off the Star Destroyer while it pounds whatever it's shooting at, whatever it's up against. But like I said, these are more kind of mixed. So we'll go through these, but basically the Empire was never able to really come up with a multi-role fighter. You had a couple like the TIE Raptor, the TIE Hunter, the TIE Avenger, the TIE Advanced, the TIE Defender, which I regard as the best starfighter in the Star Wars universe. But they were never able to come up with something equivalent to the X-Wing. And I think that's one of the reasons why their starfighter program was such a disaster. So in IRL, pretty much every modern aircraft built kind of during the late Cold War and post-Cold War is multi-role. Largely because, as I said, the introduction of missiles, particularly guided missiles, has... As well as, I guess the other thing to keep in mind is things like Stinger missiles and kind of portable anti-air has gotten a lot better. So the idea of having kind of ground attack craft is just not as good. And because of the nature of modern war, you don't really need saturation bombing anymore. Like, you don't need to level large areas. You're trying to be a bit more precision. So some examples of this would be the F-22 Raptor, the Junkers 88, the Mosquito, the BF-109, the whatever the Lockheed Lightning is, the Eagle, and that should be over there. That should not be there at all. Haha. But yeah, so you do have this kind of wide variety. Most modern jets are like this because they'll have a cannon, which isn't ever used because dogfighting doesn't exist anymore. But they will have they can be equipped with anti-air or anti-ground missiles, and you can basically use them for just about everything. So, as I said, it's a lot of countries just prefer to build one or two of those than have a bunch of dedicated ships. So here we have, probably in my opinion, the second best starfighter ever fielded, the X-Wing. The X-Wing is good at everything. It's got decent shields, decent maneuverability. When it locks S-foils, it can go pretty quick. It's got 4 laser cannons, which is more than adequate. It's got proton torpedo launchers. It's good in pretty much every situation. And being like a 7.5 in every situation is kind of better than like an A-Wing, which is like an 8.5 in anti-fighter role. But it's just an excellent all-rounder, and Rogue Squadron used them to great effect. The Republic tried to replace it with the E-Wing, which is kind of similar to an X-Wing, but it had mechanical troubles, and it just never really worked out particularly well. By the time of the Second Galactic Civil War, like 30, 40 years after the events of the movies, it started to become a bit better used, but it just never had the same amount of adoption. It did have a hyperdrive. It did have good shielding. It did have 16 proton torpedoes, which is a ton for a all-rounder fighter. So no, it was really good. It just never received the same amount of attention. We have the TIE Advanced, or the TIE Avenger, which was developed by which was what Darth Vader piloted in the first movie and was occasionally used in other things. So it had some of them, I think, it had a hyperdrive system, it had shielding. Its shielding was not particularly great, but it had shields, it had 4 laser cannons, and it had missile launchers. So it was kind of a true multi-role, very similar to the X-Wing, although I think it's a little faster. It's faster and more maneuverable. Once again, that's kind of a pilot choice. The issue is with poorly trained, mass-produced pilots, giving them fast, maneuverable ships with no shields doesn't really seem like a good idea. If anything, if you don't really have a well-trained fighter corps, you probably want people with like heavy weapons and heavy shields, because they don't really know how to make proper use of something like that. But yeah. So then we have the TIE Raptor, which was developed in Zinja's Empire. So it actually had concussion missiles. It didn't have a hyperdrive, but it was basically, I guess you could say, kind of similar to the TIE Interceptor, but it was as similar to an A-wing with 4 laser cannons and 2 concussion missiles. Excellent little ship. Never really saw widespread adoption because the Empire was cheap. Next we have the Droid Starfighter. Droid Starfighter was very good for what it was. They really, I think, understood how to use vulture droids en masse properly. If you're going to have a droid starfighter that's cheap to produce, you need to field them in absurdly large numbers. And the Confederacy got that. I think Lucrehall class would carry thousands of droid starfighters. Which is, like I said, if you're going to have a cheap mass-produced thing like this, that's a good idea. It's probably a better idea. I mean, the Empire probably should have just used some form of droid fighter, like TIE Ds or something. So if you're not going to really train your pilots and you're going to give them crappy starfighters, you might as well make them droids. While droids are less creative than human pilots, they have the advantage of you don't have to have a life support system or a cockpit, so you can make them smaller. Also, the fact that they don't have a human pilot means they G-forces really aren't that as big an issue, so they can pull off maneuvers that human pilots can't, which is kind of what makes the Tri-Fighter good. So why it's a multi-role is it has 4 cannons, which is pretty well armored. I think it depends on, there's a couple different versions of it. The CIS version had concussion missiles and 6 blaster cannons. The Trade Federation version had energy torpedoes, which I think is some sort of super laser. Well, not a super laser, but I think it was like a charged energy weapon. So you didn't have to use like a missile on it. So it theoretically had as much ammo as the thing had power. So that's kind of a useful thing for a multi-role. But yeah, the Vulture droid I actually really like. I think people are unfair to it. So let me see here. How many does it carry? Yeah, it carries 1,500 Vulture droids. So that's pretty useful. Then we also have the Naboo Starfighter, which is another example because we have blaster cannons and proton torpedoes. It also has a hyperdrive, actually a class 1, which is really fast, and shielding. And then we have the Z-90 Headhunter, 95 Headhunter, which is the early, kind of the predecessor of the X-Wing. Once again, you have the wide range of different equipment. So bombers are kind of a weird class in the Star Wars universe. Aside from in The Last Jedi, where we have the MG-100 Star Fortress, you don't have kind of what you see in real life with strategic heavy bombers, which have like 4 engines, a decently large crew, and are designed for just having an overwhelming amount of ordnance. Strategic bombers aren't really designed for attacking ground troops. They're designed for blowing up factories, for terror bombing, for area bombing, that kind of thing, for blowing up supply depots. They aren't really there to directly attack ground forces or that kind of thing. So aside from the MG 100 Star Fortress, which let's just pull that up, which looks very much like it reminds me a lot of a B-17 or a B-52 or something. And this entire thing is just full of bombs. It's kind of an interesting concept. It has, which this is just because what's his name has no idea what the fuck he's doing. But it has 1,048 proton bombs, and proton bombs are stronger than proton torpedoes. So as you can see, a single Star Fortress carried enough bombs to blow up a first order dreadnought. So it's kind of a one of a kind thing. In general, what you have is this weird kind of light bomber class, like the Y-wing, the TIE bomber, the Scimitar assault bomber, the Bell Bulba, and I'm putting the ARC-170 in here because I have no idea what the purpose of this starfighter is. Like, I don't get what the purpose of it is. Because it doesn't really have... It's not really a bomber, per se. It's kind of too big and slow to be multi-role. And it's definitely not an interceptor. So I don't really know what kind of its purpose is. So I'm just going to call it a bomber due to its size, shielding, and speed. So the most recognizable bomber is probably the Y-wing. The Y-wing is just excellent all around. It's got good shielding. It's got good armor. It's got a decent armament. It has 2 laser cannons, which isn't amazing, but it has ion cannons, proton torpedo launchers, and it can use free-fall proton bombs. So the Y-wing is slow, but being a bomber, it at least can do something about it. It has good shields, and it has good armor. So some versions of the Y-wing will also have a gunner. Now, what's interesting about it is it has shielding. It has an ion cannon. So an ion cannon is kind of another weapon. So ion cannons don't deal direct damage. What they do is they mess up electronic systems. They hurt like circuitry, shielding, all that kind of stuff. If you fire enough ion cannons, you can disable ships. Like the Rebels had the planet-mounted ion cannon, which just disabled the Star Destroyers and let their ships escape during the Battle of Hoth. So why that's useful is in an anti-capital ship role, because ion cannons aren't particularly accurate, and you don't really want to disable a starfighter, you want to blow it up. But they do a lot more damage against shielding than laser cannons do. So because a Y-wing has ion cannons, that makes them a lot more effective when they're going after corvettes or cruisers or capital ships. So basically, it just has a lot of ordnance, and if you need something bombed or you need something blown up, a Y-wing's a good choice. It's also good because you can use it as a starfighter. It's not a particularly... Oops, I can't believe I forgot to put it there. It's not a particularly good starfighter, but it's better than a TIE fighter. Just about anything is. It has laser cannons. It has shields. So it's not terrible. It's just kind of slow. The B-Wing was never really that widely adopted because it was expensive, prone to mechanical failures, etc. So much as with the X-Wing, the Republic just kept upgrading the Y-Wing. Let's see what other bombers do we have. You have the TIE Bomber, which is an absolutely terrible ship. One of the worst ships ever designed. Okay, because it's a bomber with no shields. And so it's not maneuverable, its armor is not particularly good, and it doesn't have shields. So why would you build something like that? Like, what is the purpose of it? You can't really use it against ships because it doesn't have shields. Like, one shot, it's a sitting duck. It has no way to defend itself. It doesn't even have a rear gunner. So the Y-Wing, like I said, is slow, but it has decent dogfighting capacity. It has a rear gunner, and it has powerful shields. So it's not hopeless in that role. But the TIE Bomber just serves no real purpose. It has a lot of weapons, but they're kind of free fall. So the only thing it's really good at is for mopping up after all defenses have been neutralized, because anything can shoot it down. It's more, I guess, kind of designed for a planetary bombardment role, but it's just overall just an awful ship. The only way that it's ever used well is if you just fill it to, because it does have a lot of stored space for weapons. So sometimes what people will do is they will just fill it up with homing missiles. And there's been a couple times where Imperial commanders have successfully deployed a whole bunch of them in like a line and just had them fire homing missiles. And that's actually proved devastating. But overall, it's an absolutely terrible ship. The ARC, I have no idea what the purpose of the ship is. It does have proton torpedo launchers. It has 2 medium forward laser cannons, which really isn't enough to, in my view. It has 2 aft laser cannons. Let's see here. Its laser cannons could punch through a capital ship armor. Okay, so I guess that kind of explains it. Its cannons were strong enough to do strafing runs, and it had proton torpedo launchers. So it is a bomber. Okay, it confirms that here. You can use it as a dogfighter, which I guess makes it good. I mean, it has shielding. It's decently maneuverable. It's just not particularly quick. So, and it has a rear gunner. In the Star Wars universe, gunners are considered pretty good. They're better than they are in real life. Like most guns on ships have manual gunners using them. They aren't computer controlled or remotely operated. So, ARC is a pretty good bomber. Not bad ship at all. We also have, that's not it, where is the Scimitar? So the Scimitar Assault Bomber is something that they later introduced to as kind of a successor to the TIE Bomber. So it was fairly similar. It had laser cannons, but it also had shielding. It was faster, and it had like similar proton detonators, proton grenades, 32 concussion missiles, which is a lot. It's a excellent all-round ship. And that was kind of the replacement. So that's how bombers work. We also have the droid bomber. Now, a droid bomber is an interesting concept because with a bomber, you don't really need to... with a droid bomber, because it's cheap and because you don't have to train a pilot, for all you care, you can just have it kamikaze the ship after it's launched its weapons. You don't have to worry about it getting back. And because it doesn't have a hyperdrive or a shield, yeah, you could just have it crash. Let me see if it says what the price is for this relative to a B-Wing. Okay, actually, that's not particularly cheaper than like a Y-Wing. Wow. Okay, so it's not a very good ship. It costs the same. What the hell? Okay, so a new version has 150,000 credits of a bomber. So this costs more than the TIE Bomber. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, to be perfectly honest. But assuming that these numbers are inflated, I could see the appeal of having a droid bomber. Last, we have assault ships / heavy starfighters. And the difference between a starfighter and a bomber is, I would in general say an assault ship and a bomber. I would say an assault ship is designed for more of a direct fire role, if that makes sense. A bomber is kind of designed for longer range or to drop free fall bombs or something like that. Whereas an assault ship I view more as a go in, strafe, fire all of its weapons and come back. And it being, at least in the Star Wars universe, a bit slower than a bomber, a bit larger and slower. But once again, the bomber in the Star Wars universe is very weird. Its closest IRL equivalent is things like a Martin Marauder, a Bristol Blenheim, and an A-36 Apache. It's just not a particularly common concept to have a light bomber. You normally either have a multi-role or you have a heavy bomber. So I don't even really they aren't really that widely used in Star Wars, aside from the Y-Wing, which is more of a heavy starfighter, or almost kind of like a more specialized multi-role. And the TIE Bomber is just so crappy it doesn't even bear mentioning. So, we have the K-Wing, the Skip Ray Blast Boat, and the B-Wing. So this is basically the equivalent. In fact, the K-Wing is literally just a space version of the A-10 Thunderbolt. So these ships are just designed to have a maximum amount of firepower. So the Skip Ray Blast Boat was a heavy starfighter that was unfortunately not widely adopted. So it had four crew members. And it had hyperdrive, it had good shields, so it had 3 ion cannons, 2 lasers, proton torpedo. It has just extra ion cannons. It has like a turret. It has concussion missiles, heavy proton torpedoes. This thing has the kitchen sink in it. It's just covered with weapons, both light and heavy weapons, and it can shred just about everything that gets in its path. So this is kind of the closest the Empire ever got to building an assault starfighter. It was just never really widely adopted. Small enough to be carried aboard class capital ships, some people thought of it as a capital ship because it had so much firepower. But like I said, the Empire was too cheap to ever really deploy them en masse. So, yeah. Then we have the B-Wing, which is once again a heavy starfighter or assault ship. So slower, and I think it's just less maneuverable than the Y-Wing. Yeah, like it was not very good at dogfighting. It did, however, have 4 laser cannons, an ion cannon, and a lot of proton torpedoes. So it was very good at destroying capital ships because it did have a ton of firepower. But once again, it's not designed for dogfighting. It's not good at dogfighting. It's not a very useful space superiority fighter, but it's designed for getting up close and personal and just blowing things up. The final thing we have is the K-Wing, which is absurdly heavily armored, shielded, and armed. It's completely covered in missiles. Let's see what the official description is. Medium laser cannon turret. It has a quad turbo laser. This thing has a capital ship gun on it, which I think is a reference to the A-10's 40mm Gatling gun. So it has that. It has a whole bunch of missiles. It has bombs. It has 4 crew. This thing is it's just the kitchen sink. This thing can literally just blow away anything in its path. And I think that's kind of a fitting place to end with the A-10 equivalent. The A-10 is one of my all-time favorite aircraft. It's just... The A-10 IRL is one of the few remaining aircraft that's armored. The A-10 can actually take a couple hits because it has what's called the titanium bathtub. So it actually has heavy aircraft armor that protects the pilot. So there's records of them taking a whole bunch of machine gun or even light cannon fire and coming out okay. The A-10 has a 40mm Gatling gun, which can kill pretty much anything on heaven and earth. Even tanks can't really stand up to that. It just flies in, devastates an entire area. It's got missiles. It's got heavy armor. It's excellent. Another kind of equivalent we have is the Hawker Typhoon, which served kind of a similar purpose. And the most produced military aircraft of all time, the Il-2, which was a Soviet aircraft that could be used in a variety of roles, but was one of the few mass-produced aircraft to have armor and had rockets, machine guns. It was just designed to have a lot of firepower and to be fielded in large numbers and just to provide close air support. So those are kind of there's also the J-87 Stuka. So those are kind of the main starfighter classes in Star Wars. That's kind of how they compare to IRL, and that's kind of what their role is. So as always, I hope you enjoyed the video and more stuff to come.